Hey folks, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time out. I'm Tom, I'm the TSC chair for OpenAssetIO. Joined here today with David and Elliot, who are in the core development team. We've also got Perry, Andre, Chris, and some hopefully Juan later on, who are going to be talking about some of the integrations we've been doing in the broader community. So things we're going to be looking at, first of all, a recap of the project for anyone who's not familiar. We're going to take a little look at the integration work, as I mentioned, and then get a little bit into the weeds and take a dive through some of the sort of behind the scenes work we've been doing to facilitate that. But first off, a little bit of figuring out who we've got here so we can try and make sure this is relevant for you. So if you have a look in the chat, we should have a link for you. And if I can get my cursor on here, oh, come out of full screen, present, come on, behave. Cracking. Hopefully you've got a link in the chat. If you can click on there, feel free to skip adding a name. No stress there. It'd be great just to get a bit of a sense of which part of the industries you folks are from, so we don't end up being overly specific. Has everyone got that coming through? Fantastic. Oh, I like it. Who's in the other camp? We were trying to think of some categories. Does anyone mind shouting out where you're from? Not to worry, no stress. So a good film, TV heavy representation, which is, I guess, kind of to be expected. But welcome people from other sections of the world. I'm getting more and more excited by this other thing now. So that's fantastic. We'll try not to be too niche in our descriptions. Brilliant, thanks all. So second question, how technical do you want us to be? We're going to have a few technical bits regardless, because we know this is being recorded and people who can't make it will be watching later. Love it. Yes. Great. You won't be disappointed then. We've got plenty of low-level topics coming up. So that's nice to know. Thank you all. And lastly, but by no means least, we're kind of curious just if there's what the familiarity with the project is amongst you all so far, just so we don't make too many assumptions as well. Cool, nice. Oh, that's a good spread. Well, welcome back, old hands. Hello, new people. Brilliant. Oh, great. That's certainly weighing in nicely. So this first bit may be slightly redundant, but forgive us anyway, because we thought it was worth an recap. What is OpenAssetIO? I thought we'd start first by looking at the problems we're trying to solve. So what you can see here is some screenshots from some off-the-shelf integrations of some of the sort of non-proprietary pipeline tools that are out there. We've got OpenPipe. Sorry, this is before the rebrand. I apologize. And the shotgrid one here. And kind of the point to note is that a lot of the critical functions that artists have to work with are kind of on the side of where they would normally be. They're not in the file menu and so on. And that's because it's really hard to create seamless workflows inside of DCC tools, even though we have all of the APIs. And with my Foundry hat on, we try really hard to make sure things are customizable. I generally think we could do better in this respect. And part of the reason that this is difficult is people building pipelines have to deal with a whole slew of different APIs just to do the same thing here. So I've deliberately made this an assault on the eyes, but this is just the landing pages for just a small handful of the different developer portals for all of some of the projects that we have in this space. And they're all different. Trying to do a simple task needs you to learn 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 different APIs. And we think there's a better way. And this is really what the project's about. So what is OpenAssetIO? It's an open standard that is really aiming to help connect the tools that consume and create content in the spaces that we work in with the data management systems that exist that allow artists to work together collaboratively, and building this in a first-class fashion. So we're going to look at how we kind of facilitate what we hope to be better workflows for artists, so they can have less chances of error, they can have all of the right information available to them whilst they're working in the right context, and hopefully this leads to slightly more long-term sanity and less hair-related problems. And for those on the other side of the fence building these pipelines and these tools, we really hope you can spend your efforts innovating and building new workflows rather than having to write the same business logic and glue code over and over again against tens of different APIs. And for those here with your business hat on, really it's about, can we increase delivery efficiency, reduce onboarding costs for artists, and also just help all the investment that we're making in our tooling and our workspace be about innovation rather than just kind of treading water and keeping up with the status quo. So this is really what we hope to achieve. And I'm shamelessly stealing something from Joshua's open timeline presentation, but I really liked it, which is, why do we call it OpenAssetIO? Well, the open part is we truly believe in this being a community-owned standard. So right from the pre-alpha stages, all the development's been in the open on GitHub. We have public ceremonies and meetings, and already we've had fantastic input and contributions from people that have shaped the API to be what it is, and it's in a much better place than if we published this behind closed doors. The asset part is probably the most hard to describe, and this word means many things to many people, and we don't actually call them assets internally. We call them entities to try and avoid the ambiguity, but we call it asset because it's really about helping keep track of all of the things that we deal with in production. And this goes beyond, it's not just about files, it's about the other things that we have to work with too: shots, sequences, projects, some of them all sort of like logical assets, if you were. IO, not just because we're copying the naming convention that we have, but we want this to be a practically useful thing. It's not just a spec. What you get is a library, C++ core, with bindings to Python, and also C, which is partially work in progress. And it allows you to just talk to these systems and obtain information about assets and their data, discover new ones, and work with bookending the creation process so you can tell these systems about new data that's being made. So this is kind of the space that we're in. And we've done this by breaking this problem down into several components. So the core library itself, we're hoping, is going to be quite stable. And this defines the verbs that you need to have an interaction between one of these content creation tools, Maya, Nuke, Max, Photoshop, even, whatever, right? And the systems that manage the data. And it's kind of broken. We see it in two directions. One of the verbs, for example, is resolve, which is where you wish to query some information. And then we have some verbs around creating new data. So pre-flight and register, they bookend, say, for example, a render operation or something like this. Because we've realized this process is common across a whole varieties of industries like AC, construction, design, and also sort of our media and entertainment space that we largely have represented here too. Games also, and the mystery other, hopefully. We split out the adjectives that describe the assets and the content that we're working with into their own kind of space. So if you've been involved in our ecosystem, you'll see we also have the OpenAssetIO media creation library. And this is where we can start to be very concrete about particular types of things. The way we do this is we create what's called specifications, for example, for an image. We say that this composes several traits or qualities of entry. So, for example, an image might have an URL, which is the path to where you find the actual data, but it may also have like a resolution and a color space or something like that. Moving beyond this, we talked about artist experience. There's another layer that's coming next year, which is the UI layer, which is about how to seamlessly embed the specific browsers and user interface elements that characterize any particular management system, the real sort of unique qualities of those, but being able to put them directly into the tools where the artists need them, so they're not operating through a letterbox on the side. Talk a bit more about that later, but that's sort of coming in the future. So just a little recap of how we kind of see those different components sitting. And the important points to note, I think, the core library is not about trying to create a one-size-fits-all solution. It's really about better building blocks. So we still see pipeline development being essential, but it's about how can we make that easier so you spend the time building the workflows, not just puppeting software. And in terms of when we talk about media creation space, this isn't about replacing file formats. It's not about how you get to the bytes of data. So don't worry, we're not trying to change all of the storage techniques that you're using. This is not about replacing USD or anything like that. It's about working with these existing types of content. For the technical amongst us, and I saw that we were quite well represented there, what we're really talking about is the what, not the where. And to do this, we introduced the idea of what we call an entity reference. If you're into your acronyms, kind of a URI instead of a URL, right, that points to the thing that the person wants. And the idea is you can use the verbs in the core API to work with these objects. And some examples here of how this could be formed. The important point to note is the API doesn't dictate what these look like. The pipeline owns and supplies these identifiers, and they're simply trafficked through these applications that keep hold of them as references. So you're completely in control as a pipeline author as to how this works and what it looks like. So a little example here of using the resolve method to query some information about, in this case, what might be a plate from on set in a film. We're asking for several traits about this. In this case, as an image, it's where it is, what's the frame range, and what's the OCI color space. And you can see we then have this metadata that is vital to the correct interpretation of this asset. And what we're hoping is the API gives tools a common way to talk to sources of truth that know about this information. So it stays in sync, you get the right values, and there's an easy way to find this out. And you may think this is useful for read, but something we've seen a lot in pipelines is making sure newly created data is in the right file format with the right encodings. They've rendered the right frames. So when you come in the morning to review the work, you're not missing the 10 critical ones at the end because the cut's changed. This is applicable for both creation of new data and the reading of existing ones. And we hope that in the future, this is an example of, it allows us to build first-class workflows inside of these tools. So this could be something that you could have in a video editing package where you get a new EDL from the client, you've got a new cut of the project, something's changed, and you want to talk to whatever the source of truth is in your facility, the production tracking system or asset management system, and work out what changed since the EDL you got yesterday. And you can see here, through OpenAssetIO, the tool's gone, it's checked out all the shots that match up with these clips on the timeline, and you can see which ones are different and which ones have changed, and start to create very high quality tools for people to work with through this common ability to talk to these other centralized sources of truth. So it's kind of where we're hoping to get to in the long term. So yeah, just to recap, a couple of things. This isn't about getting to bytes of factual data. It's about how you find where they are. It's not a replacement for any particular data formats we're using at the moment. And it absolutely isn't about telling you how your databases should work, what structure you should have. It's just about agreeing some interactions with those. So please don't see this as being a constraint. Hopefully it's more of a better set of building blocks. Any questions on that at the high level before we pass over to some of the integrations? Cool, thanks. So this year's all been about working towards what we'll happily call a V1 of the stable core API surface. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing this in the open, and we're really keen to make sure it was fit for purpose. So a lot of our time has been spent working with other people, other projects, to make sure that these things dovetail together quite naturally. We don't have any incompatible concepts. And we're very lucky to have some folks here today who are going to hopefully be able to talk a little bit more about this. So first of all, our first proof of concept we did was actually working with Open Timeline here, which David's going to talk about for us.
Great, yeah. Next slide. Oh yeah, I can do it. Yeah, so our first proof of concept integration was an OTIO plugin. So this includes a media linker that resolves external references through OpenAssetIO. And doing this, we hope, would provide us with an opportunity to sneak OpenAssetIO in the back door, as it were, into existing OTIO-enabled applications. At the moment, the plugin can only handle single media references, but we did work with the OTIO community on the recent multi-ref edition and validated that we could expand a media reference into multiple media references using OpenAssetIO's entity relationship query facility. So we hope to include that bit in the plugin when time permits, but if anyone's interested in contributing to that effort, please do let us know. Great to get some more contributors. Yeah, so in the meantime, this is the complete media linker function, which I hope illustrates how little code we need to actually get going. This snippet shows the main steps in just resolving through an asset manager using the simplest form of the OpenAssetIO API. So firstly, at the top there, We're just ignoring any media references that are not an OTIO external reference. So that's an OTIO specific thing. Otherwise, in the rest of it, we're going to attempt to resolve the reference through OpenAssetIO. The next step, this session state function, is hiding some of the details of the initial bootstrapping of OpenAssetIO. So it's not particularly important for this example, but in that, we're just using the arguments to the media linker to work out which manager to talk to. But then we construct an entity reference object. So these are pre-validated, strongly typed, just thin wrappers around the entity reference string, or the asset reference. And then on the next line, we're resolving the actual data that we want. So that's the real workhorse here. So we're resolving the actual data associated with the entity reference. And crucially, the second parameter to the resolve function there is the set of trait IDs, and that's informing the manager which qualities of the entity that we're interested in. And the final parameter there is a serializable OpenAssetIO context object, which stores various session level state and allows the manager plugin itself to remain logically at least stateless, which is a very useful property for multi-threading and especially multi-process workflows. The object returned from resolve is best thought of as an opaque blob of trait data, which must be accessed by applying a trait view class. And so that final line is an example of one of the traits in the media creation package, which Tom mentioned earlier, which in this case is the locatable content trait, which has a location property telling us where to find the actual data for the clip. That's it. Back to Tom.
Thanks, David. That's cracking. So we were quite pleased to see how well that worked. So we thought, who's next on the open software stack that we could take a look at? And so Elliot's going to talk about some work we did with the UC.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. Thanks, David. So OpenAssetIO as a project aims to be integratable with all sorts of technologies and pipelines. It's essential, in fact. And as a way to validate this, we wanted to see if we could map OpenAssetIO concepts to another big technology in the space. And USD certainly counts as another big technology in the space, especially recently. And double especially because USD has its own resolver API called AR2. And we wanted to confirm that our concept sort of mapped to another sort of technology with similar ideas, because we need to be adaptable. So quick aside, if you don't know, USD stands for Universal Scene Description, and is a technology to sort of define and describe and compose 3D scenes. So we have created the USD OpenAssetIO resolver, which sort of integrates an OpenAssetIO resolve into a USD AR2 resolve. So you'll see here in the image, of code, we have an OpenAssetIO entity reference directly inside a USD file. So you can link up your sort of USD space with the rest of your OpenAssetIO enabled pipeline seamlessly. Next slide. So whilst we wrote this plugin as sort of a proof of concept, more and more content creation tools are adding native USD support. And we think the ability to resolve OpenAssetIO references inside USD documents is like an excellent pipeline capability. And we think smaller studios especially sort of stand to benefit from this, because sort of as the space lights up in OpenAssetIO, the need to write like a bespoke AR2 plugin to integrate USD in your pipeline could completely disappear, which is great if you don't have resources to write a lot of different plugins. So a short side note, perhaps controversial. AR2, USD AR2 has an interface that forbids Python resolvers for very, very good and valid concerns over GIL performance, which I won't get into. However, we have observed many folks have sort of taken that interface, bought their own Python interpreter, shelled out to it, because a lot of pipeline code exists in Python as it stands, and people don't want to or can't rewrite all their stuff in C++, etc. OpenAssetIO is a cross-language technology, so your manager can be implemented in Python whilst you're hosting in C++. So I guess it's good that you get this for free. It is controversial, but this is sort of a thing that OpenAssetIO lets you do. And in the future, you'll see later, we're sort of working on ameliorating the GIL performance issue, but one of my colleagues will talk about that later. But the main thing with this though is that in the future with an OpenAssetIO enabled pipeline, forwarding to OpenAssetIO means OpenAssetIO can continue to be the singular abstraction atop your single source of truth across a pipeline that contains both USD and non-USD resources in this example. Even though normally, AR2 or similar interfaces would force a bespoke integration from you. And that's really what we see as the benefit. And that is that section.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elliot. And I'm hoping we've got Juan with us here from Foundry Nuke team. Are you around, Juan?
Yeah. Hello,
Fantastic.
everyone. Right. So obviously we've been a bit close to the project, and we really believe in what OpenAssetIO can actually help on this, and really trying to remove a little bit of the amount of sticky tape.
Oh no, we lost him. Oh, he's back.
We'll be doing a beta for 14.1 and 15 very soon. And within that, we are introducing a tech preview of the support of OpenAssetIO in Nuke. So what we're really looking here is we added it to the read nodes, so you can have it on the read nodes and obviously the read node paths as well. And what we're looking here is for feedback on how does Nuke integrate and how we do that integration properly in the next step, as well as kind of making sure on the support and the priorities that we need to do for this to really help on making your pipelines a lot easier, obviously for the people that has pipelines on the front side or on any areas that work with Nuke. So yeah, that's where we are with Nuke on OpenAsset.
Fantastic, thanks, Juan. And it's really nice to see the first stage of this being inside of a commercially available tool as well, which is hopefully really going to be helpful for people to try this out in practice. Talking of real world actual things, we're really lucky, I think, here to have some of the folks from Input with us. Milan and Ondek, I didn't know which of you was starting, but over to you if you want to take over screen sharing. If I can find my little Zoom button.
Okay, so no screen sharing for me. Hello, everyone. We are in a middle of implementing OpenAssetIO in our world. Of course, we had to actually do the same thing what OpenAssetIO addresses already, but in not that universal way anyway. So the biggest benefit we see in OpenAssetIO is actually the zero code that is needed to integrate the new hosts inside our ecosystem, because whenever we want to support new DCC, for example, we had to code the implementation itself and dig into the API, how the stuff works inside. But with OpenAssetIO, and if the host itself is supporting OpenAssetIO, it means that any host can actually load stuff directly from our own asset management system, no matter if it knows our API or if we know its API. And so we hope that this will actually help us to in the future to add new hosts direct into Ion without having to code anything. And with that, we have our own representations of data. Basically, it's something that's in OpenAssetIO world called traits, and that's one of the biggest issues right now, or not issues, but one of the biggest tasks that we have is to define the specific traits that could be used universally, because that's something that will actually connect everything together. So now we are wrapping our heads how to handle that, and of course, the aspect of resolving is the important one, but also the publishing side of things. That's the next step for us, because the resolving is almost done, and the publishing will need more work. How to connect it to the pipeline, because Ion is based on slightly different concepts, but I believe that we can put them together. So That's our state. I hope that we will finish the manager plugin for OpenAssetIO soon, and that the discussion about the traits will begin, because we have a first draft of them, and I really love to discuss it with community. So that's from me. I don't know if Milan has something more to say, but that's us.
I think, hello everyone, just to add to Andre, for anyone who hasn't noticed in the past year, when we're talking about ION, it used to be called OpenPipe. So if anyone has hit those terms, we're in the middle of the world of rebranding everything, including the product. But what I wanted to add to it, that there is another general benefit that we're hoping to get out of it. We are working on our own USD resolver, which calls our API natively and directly. Of course, there is some benefit in that, we are assuming, because it's a direct connection, we can achieve certain speed. However, for many studios that want to lower the entry point into major pipeline ecosystem like ION is at the moment, I'm talking lots of DCCs, multiple APIs, it is definitely not a trivial job to get it up and running in a major studio. There's quite a lot of
The internets are not being kind to us today. Give him a moment, see if he makes it back. Did you have anything else you wanted to wrap up with, Andre?
I'm not sure. The gods of internet are not easily to please. So yeah, I mean, yeah, the point of the the USD and OpenAssetIO, I'm glad that I heard the presentation just before us, that the resolver for USD and the connectivity with ION itself is really important, and I think that it will lower the bar for many smaller and middle-sized studios just to get into the USD world, and we are glad to help with that, along with to provide the option to use more USD resolvers, because then with the OpenAssetIO it will be possible to have a bunch of them and just choose whatever fits your needs. So I hope that this is something that Milan wanted to say, so that's about it. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, and thanks both for joining. Moving further into the future, we have Chris is going to, from Movie Labs, is going to share some words with us on the work that we've been doing together on a couple of topics, I think.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yep.
We can.
And can you see the presentation?
We can.
Okay. Okay. So for those of you who don't know who Movie Labs are, it's a studio technology joint venture. So you have some of the major studios listed below. And again, this has been a venture that's been going back since the early 2000s, relative to, they've done a lot of work on distribution. And in the last few years, the studios have changed the focus to more on production. And so there's, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to go to the Movie Labs website, there's a 2030 vision for production. And there's been a lot of efforts around things like software-defined workflows, content security, there's a visual language, and there's also an ontology for media creation, which we'll get into today. There's 10 principles which are at the core of the 2030 vision relative to these three big categories, cloud, foundation, security, and access. And as we talked about, software-defined workflows. And again, we're not going to get into all of these today. There's a presentation at SIGGRAPH, and not SIGGRAPH, at the open source days, where we're going to go through the demonstration of what we've been building with Tom and the team. But we really want to focus in on a few of these principles, or just understand these principles, because again, it's kind of the main reason why we came to OTIO and OpenAssetIO and OpenRV to try to solve some of our problems. So the other aspect, and Tom, we talked about this, sort of what we want to talk to about today, is that there's this ontology for media creation that we've been developing with the large studios, a lot of the vendors like the Foundry, Autodesk, others, to try to define a language, set of defined terms, and a set of relationships for the way that media is created. So things like, what are tasks that are done in the process? Who are the participants? what is the context? So again, the context, things like scenes, locations for the narrative or the script. And then we get into production, really also key things like scene, location, or shot. We'll get in today, what are the assets? Again, how do you describe things like, images and movies and audio, and really also the relationships that are defined between the two of them. So we've been working quite a bit on defining this ontology. It's got a first version. We're working even on the second version. And this is a data model. There's also various representations in JSON and stuff that we are building around trying to be able to communicate specifically around interoperability and data moving between key parts of the production process. So I won't get into all the stuff that we did, because again, we do have a presentation at the open source days where we're going to be walking through how we used OpenAssetIO, OpenTimeline.io, and OpenRV to demonstrate certain parts of the Movie Lab 2030 vision. But I'll give you kind of the high level today, and kind of the parts where we were happy to be one of the first customers of OpenAssetIO. So we picked a particular, simple use case. I don't think this is anything shocking to anyone on this call, an editorial turnover process where, you were in an editing software with a bunch of sources, probably locally on disk. I render a new version of the timeline, and I will upload that to a review tool that could be anything from Frame.io to Moxion to Pix. There are reviewers. I give them access to the media. Another copy is made, and many times when you're doing, again, the VFX review changes, you're going into something like Nuke Studio or things, a lot of times that media is then transferred to an organization and another copy is made. So in the world of the 2030 vision, where we want all the media to be on the cloud, we don't want to create copies, we want everything to be ID based, this current workflow is not optimal. And if you take into account security and software defined workflows, the second that media is on someone's local computer, it's quite hard to get any level of security. And at the end of this process, there are multiple copies left that, it's very hard to clean up or even know where they are. So the proof of concept that we went out to try and build was we wanted to show what that workflow would be like if we tried to espouse some of the principles of the 2030 vision. So I kind of put the ones on the right that are the really important ones where, when you publish or create a new version, it's really just about, changing permissions. It's not about moving information around. The second one, which is, great when in the context of this conversation, is that we wanted that individual elements to be referenced, tracked, and interrelated using a universal linking system, which again, we'll talk about how we used OpenAssetIO there. And then again, on this model where we want to ingest the assets straight to the cloud as opposed to moving them around. So again, what we'll show at SIGGRAPH is, we rendered out, in this case, of Adobe Premiere using an automation system called Helmet. We rendered that to some shared cloud storage. We then registered that with an asset management system, Iconic in this case, where we had the IDs that were appropriate. We generated an OpenTimeline.io file from the editing software, kind of, from XML to OTIO using OpenTimeline.io's libraries. And then in those libraries, we generated the IDs in the OpenAssetIO format, and in an ID that we could go through OpenRV, load up an OTIO, which had a bunch of IDs. We then looked up the assets, and through that we use OpenAssetIO and our own resolver to unlock to convert those IDs into the actual URLs, and then we stream them in OpenRV to be able to play it back in real time and do the review without actually having copies move around, or also take into account security, because you have to have a policy to be able to load the OTIO. So we'll demonstrate all of that at the SIGGRAPH Birds of a Feather. But we wanted to just get on today and say, hey, we were very happy to find a fellow traveler, to use a term Jim Hellman from Movie Labs uses, in this process of trying to work through some of these principles, specifically in data not moving around as part of a particular software-defined workflow, and the fact that we want to move to an ID-based world as opposed to file paths, which again has kind of been the world that we've lived in so far. Some learnings, some of the stuff some of this was worked quite well, especially the part when we get to the part on OpenRV when OpenAssetIO resolves the playback. That's working quite nicely. But the DCC workflows of getting data in and propagating these things around was not the most easiest thing in the world, and not all systems are kind of yet attuned to a world that OpenAssetIO is kind of aiming towards, and the Movie Labs 2030 version is aiming for. So great that we were able to test out some of these concepts and be one of the first customers of OpenAssetIO. But definitely some work to do in the whole ecosystem for that everyone's a good citizen in terms of moving this type of information around. Anything else, Tom? Any questions?
That's great. Thanks, Chris. And just to sort of link in there, when we were talking about the media creation repository, we very much would like to sort of see that single sourced with the ontology in the Movie Lab space. Brilliant. Thank you for that, Chris. We're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive now, I think, if I can steal the screen sharing back. And we're going to take a look inside, a little bit lower down in the library stack. Oh, let me move this annoying giant green thing out of the way. And see sort of some of the dev work that's been going on the engineering side of things, but I'm not distracted by doing that. So busy year indeed. We've had 12 releases, all sorts of commits, but mainly I sort of want to call a thank out for everyone who's helped contribute to the design documents we've been working on and has given feedback on code changes as they've been coming in. But what good is all of this if you can't get to it? And I'm going to hand over to Elliot, who's our bastion champion of accessibility and usability of all of this stuff.
Thank you so much. Tom says we're gonna do a deep dive, but you'll have to indulge me because I would like to talk about usability. I always want to talk about usability. So a big point of focus for OpenAssetIO over the last year has been ease of use, especially as we sort of work with POCs and trying to get integration. And we've learned a lot, especially because the project lives or dies by its community adoption. Like, we need the community to help us, and we need the ecosystem there. And no matter how incredible an API service you design, and ours is incredible, we're aware, that if a library isn't easy to acquire and easy to configure and easy to use, we're going to struggle to get an ecosystem that we really need. So I'm going to do a very quick run through about some of the stuff we've been doing this last year to address that. Right. So first, I'm going to try and get my notes working. Sorry. So long story short, on this slide, we are on PyPy now, and it's awesome. Attainability and configurability is essential, and pipeline technologies especially, you need to be able to get it onto your environment easily. So a big win has been putting PyPy into our regular release process. So whenever there's a release, it goes up with PyPy. Thanks especially to Jean-Christophe for helping us out with a lot of the Python-specific integration into getting this process working. That was very helpful. One thing to know is, like, you'll see, so you have on the right, we have OpenAssetIO TradeGen, media creation, as I mentioned. OpenAssetIO isn't, the one library, and there's like a whole ecosystem of libraries that you'll be working with when you do OpenAssetIO. So, distribution is even more important. And this combos, just being able to pip install this combos beautifully with another thing we ripped off shamelessly from OpenTimeline.io, which is our Python plugin system, which, I guess, long story short, means normally when you just pip install a manager, your host will just be able to find them. Which is excellent because we don't want to force pipeline devs to be doing configuration and manual setup and stuff like that. So that's good. That's all well and good. Python. What about C++? Now, any C++ devs out there may know that C++ package management is not a solved problem. And I guess the good news is we do have a Conan package. The bad news is it's a little bit work in progress, a little bit rough. Because to tell you a story, we chose to do this work just as the Conan 2 upgrade was happening. And OpenAssetIO, due to its ambition, is not the simplest library, especially as a C Python dependency. And combined with the Conan 2 upgrade has made that a tricky process. So we view this Conan package as a little bit of work in progress, and we're, I guess, reconsidering our C++ deployment story. Because this was like, oh, this is we can't keep doing this to ourselves. So we're thinking, maybe we just do tarballs, leveraging VFX reference platform. Maybe we look at the AWSF Cowland index, like we'll have better control there. But this is still very much an evolving story for us. I guess, how do you like to manage your C++ dependencies? Tell us the solution. We're very interested. Who has solved this problem?
If anyone's got the poll link, there should be a poll on there. If you jot down how you like to manage your C++ stuff, that'd be really helpful, and we can have a look a bit later. So I think the link scroll back in the chat.
And then beyond sort of acquiring OpenAssetIO distribution, like what about getting started with OpenAssetIO? What about people trying to develop new POCs? And how, what sort of problems do they have? So people normally cry out for onboarding resources. What can I go and look at? Tell me. And there's 3 things. There's API docs, which are good. We have great API docs, but they're a little bit impregnable. There's a guide doc, like conceptual paragraphs in English, like here's what OpenAssetIO is, here's how it works. We've got great guide doc as well, and this is better. But what people really want, and they always say, give me this, is working examples, and these are absolutely fabulous. So here's, as OpenAssetIO is a project where you have a manager and a host, you need examples of both. And here is a listing with links, if the slides are available later, of all the current sort of available examples that we have. We are a bit saddened to see the manager side so small, but it is understandable. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. You want the host to get a lot of managers, you want a lot of managers to get a lot of hosts. And even building a toy manager is hard. A lot of the complexity in OpenAssetIO is on the manager side, specifically because we want to make it as easy as possible for hosts. And even if people were building managers, largely they're proprietary, we wouldn't even know about it. So if anyone has a manager we don't know about, please get in touch. We'd love to add you to the list, especially if you use it as an example. I would like to draw your attention specifically to the template OpenAssetIO manager Python there on the left, because I wrote it and I'm super proud of it. Go look at it. But also because it is sort of, unlike a lot of these other examples, explicitly written as a template to start with, so it's all well docked. So if you're going to try and implement a manager, that is a great place to start, and it's quite new. So I thought I would point it out explicitly. Next up, I'm going to talk about BAL. You may have seen BAL on some of the slides before. This is our basic asset library. And this is keeping on the theme of making things easier for implementers. So BAL is an asset manager. It's an out-of-the-box test manager for host plugin authors, intended to be sort of puppetable, because when you're writing a host, you need a manager to be able to integrate against, to run and test things. So we provide this thing called BAL. It's on PyPy. You saw before, so you just go get it when you're writing your host and you can use it. And since BAL is sort of our own test manager, it does tend to stay completely up to date with OpenAssetIO features. So it will continue to work as an excellent test manager. One thing to note, however, is I was just talking about examples. BAL is perhaps not the best example to look at and read from because of all of the code it has in it. To be puppetable and mockable and a good test manager makes it perhaps a less good example manager. So I would steer you towards the sample repo for that. And finally, API compliance, be compliant. Sounds scary, but it's not. This is another implementer support tool, but this time for manager authors. OpenAssetIO provides this thing called the API Compliance Suite, which is a test harness for exercising a manager. I mentioned before how a lot of the complexity in OpenAssetIO is on the manager side. And that is because OpenAssetIO puts some constraints like managers should behave in certain ways so hosts can get expectable behavior and we can be a nice abstraction. So we provide the API Compliance Suite, which will programmatically exercise your manager to ensure it's following certain rules that we expect. And as anyone who's implemented against a vague interface that's you have to dig around in the docs to find out what it actually expects you to do, this is I find it a godsend. But yeah, thank you for indulging me in a jaunt through, and I guess I'll hand this back off. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Elliot. I have time to get a train as well. But anyway, so get a train halfway up the country. I'm going to hand you over to David, who's going to talk a little bit more about the system we use for classifying things.
Sure. Yeah, so rather than attempt to fully define an exhaustive catalog of asset types, we instead describe entities through the set of traits that they can satisfy. So a trait is like a tag that can be assigned to an entity. And traits may have associated properties whose values can vary between different entities. And we can then formalize common sets of traits into what we call specifications. So specifications are the closest OpenAssetIO gets to defining the concrete type of an entity. And they're mostly a notational convenience. The important thing is the underlying trait set of an entity. So in terms of code, under the hood, trait data is simply an agreed set of keys and value types in a dictionary-like data structure. So really, we wanted to introduce some kind of view data structure on that wraps this trait data and can provide a more concrete and IDE-friendly and type-checked interface. And we wanted to create these trait views across any number of languages as language support grows for OpenAssetIO, but without rewriting the same logic for each supported language. And ideally use a single source of language agnostic and human readable truth for these trait definitions. So taking a lot of inspiration from USD with its USD Gen Schema tool, we developed a tool we call TraitGen. So TraitGen takes as input a YAML file, so you can see a small snippet at the top left there, and we provide a schema for validation if you're constructing a YAML file, and it outputs language-specific code. So the YAML file lets you define traits and specifications in a language-agnostic way. And in this slide, you can see an example of the YAML input to TraitGen and then usage of the Python code it generates at the bottom there. So you might recognize this snippet from the OTIO media linker example I presented earlier. TraitGen itself is a pure Python tool, so it's easy to set up. It's available on the OpenAssetIO GitHub org, and it's what we've used to generate the trait views for the media creation package we mentioned earlier. Currently, it generates C++ and Python, but it is extensible to other languages since it just uses a simple template rendering strategy, similar to how web pages are rendered on a server. We are aware of the pain involved in schemas like these changing over time, especially in this case, where multiple parties must agree on their definition for software to even work. So explicit version management is something we know we need to pay careful attention to as soon as possible. And in that vein, we've initiated a working group on ASWF Slack with some folks from OTIO and USD. And you can see the channel there, API data schemas. Since we know these other projects, they have the same problem that they've solved in different ways, and we want to learn from their solutions and indeed from each other. But ultimately, for these trait definitions, we have to agree on them as a community so that tools and pipelines can be developed in isolation, but still work together. And for more on the community aspect of developing these traits, I'll hand over to Perry.
Hello, I'm Perry, Technology Program Manager at Foundry. Yeah, so we really have been discussing it in-house using the tools that we have, Nuke and Katana. And the plan is to create a first draft. So it's amazing to hear that you guys already have a first draft of this as well, Andre. But SIGGRAPH got in the way, so we've been a bit distracted with planning for SIGGRAPH. But post SIGGRAPH, we will share a first draft of this proposal with the wider community to get feedback. And yeah, as David said, we just want to learn from the community what went well, what didn't go well, and how we can create our governing model for how we manage ours, with the hope that we have a V1 by Christmas. Yeah, that's the aim.
Harry, that's awesome. We just see we're a little bit short on time, so we're gonna take a lightning jump through some of the next sections, and we can pick up on this on Slack afterwards. And it is slightly relevant to your question, Jonathan, that I just saw about C++ examples. So slightly fast forwarding some of these things, which are awesome. We currently have, do you mind if I just quickly zoom? Currently, we don't have a C++ plugin system yet for managers, but you can write a host application in C++. There are some C++ codes in the test area. So if you have a look in the test CMake section, is that right, David?
Yeah.
There should be some C++ host codes there that you can see, but we don't have any on the manager side yet. One of the big things that we're looking at coming up as part of getting ready for production ready state is making sure you can choose to write the performant parts of the code in C++. We're very aware of the problems Python can have at scale, but we don't want to force the entirety of the publishing system to be written in C++, as Elliot was mentioning before. Many people who talked to said, for example, their publishing functions are in Python, but their resolvers in C++. So we want to support these hybrid workflows with a minimal impact on runtime where we can. So lots to talk about there, which we had lined up, but we're going to have to scoot through just out of being a little short on time. So quick recap, open source library, we need your input. It's all about connecting our content creation tools into data management systems. There's this very stable core, and then there'll be these sort of industry-specific applications on top, very much coupled with the ontology in the movie lab space. And it really is about improving workflows and reducing boilerplate. As of today, DCC tools and applications can be Python, C++. Right now, managers are Python only, but C++ coming soon, as we alluded to above. There's a roadmap on GitHub if you want to have a little look. Looking for a beta, which is where we see this core surface area being stable. Hoping for a V1 sometime beginning of next year. And then after that, we're going to move on to the UI side of things, where it really starts to get a lot more relevant for artists at this point. After that, there's a whole load of advanced topics such as transactions and permissions, but we really wanted to get more of an established audience within the community and people using it in vain before we get onto some of these more complicated topics. So yeah, bunch of challenges. The biggest challenge, I think, is it's a chicken and egg problem, right? Who's going to go first? And we're really hoping that the progress we're seeing on the software side of the creation software side of things, like the work Nuke showed, there's some POCs around Katana and wider than that if we can. We surveyed the audience a little while ago on ASWF, and though not comprehensive, 50% of people said they had their own pipeline. So our feeling is that prioritizing, trying to get content creation tool adoption is more of a priority. Let us know how you feel about that. We can pick this up on Slack or in the discussion at SIGGRAPH if you're around on the Monday. So if you do want to get involved, the usual channels are all open. Come hang out at our meetings if you like to. We'd always love your input. Lots of thanks to everyone who's been involved in this over the years, especially Foundry for helping keep this going at the rate it is at the moment, which is great to see. And yeah, thanks to the ASWF community really, and everyone who's helped there. So yeah, sorry, a little short on time, but spaces for any questions if anyone has any.
Are we allowed to share this slide deck? Because there's a few questions, there's lots of links in there, and there's a few questions about links. Is that possible to share prior to the recording going out, or do they need to go out together?
The slide, I'll put the slide deck in the chat just now. I think it's got anyone with the link can see it.
Thank
Google Docs style fun. Hopefully that will work. And you can have a little peruse at the speaker notes as well if you're interested in the C++ Python area. David had a wonderful section all lined up, which I feel really bad for stealing from him. Cool. If there isn't anything for anyone else, as Chris mentioned, come see us on Sundays in I think it's the Marriott for the Open Source Days talk. I can't remember the time off the top of my head. And then we have our OpenAssetIO Birds of a Feather for a discussion about some of these topics, which I think is also there, and that's on the Monday at 9 AM, I think. Don't hold me to those times, but we'd love to see you and chat to you if you happen to be in the vicinity. Sunday will be broadcast, I think. Is that right, Emily?
Yes, Sunday will be recorded. You can attend virtually. It will be recorded and posted after the fact, probably the week after.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for coming and listening to us. Hit us up on Slack if you have any other questions. Sorry, Jonathan, I just saw your question as well. We've been circulating the idea as broadly as we can in public. So I think if you want to speak to any of your representatives at the other large DCC vendors, please express your support for the project there and share some enthusiasm. Fantastic. Well, thanks all. Have a lovely rest of the day, wherever you might be, and hopefully see you around.